Good evening. Welcome back to Biblical Insights with Bob. Tonight we're looking at chapters 8 and 9 in the book of Matthew. Now, one of the things we completed a study of the previous chapters, 5 to 7, include the teachings about the kingdom. Of course, the most prominent part of that, of course, is the Sermon on the Mount, which Jesus taught about the kingdom. How many times in that sermon did he mention the kingdom of God? And so that is the teaching on the kingdom. Now, chapters 8 and 9 are, I've called it, the signs of the kingdom. There are 10 miracles recorded in these two chapters, and we want to look at them in a couple of different lessons. 10 miracles kind of makes it click in your mind. There were 10 plagues in Egypt. Now there are 10 miracles that are signs of redemption, or the signs of the kingdom. This is half of the miracles that Matthew records in his entire gospel in these two chapters. Actually, there are 3 groups of miracles, and we're going to look at them as groups. They're broken up by sections of narrative or teaching, but there's 3 groups. The first group involves healings. The second demonstrates his power. And the third are acts of restoration. Together, this kind of presents a slice of life out of Jesus' overall ministry. Like I said, now remember, this is half of the miracles that Matthew records. And so we're going to look at those. This lesson, I want us to look at the first 3 miracles in particular. Remember, these are miracles of healing. There were certain things that every Jew of Jesus' day knew would be signs of the Messiah. In other words, the Messiah would perform certain miracles that they knew. And these groups kind of move into those 3 areas. And so let's look at the first one. It's chapter 8 and 2 to 4 is our first miracle. But I'll start with verse 1. When Jesus came down from the mountain, what mountain? The mountain where he taught the Sermon on the Mount. When Jesus came down from the mountain, large crowds followed him. And a leper came to him and bowed down before him and said, "Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean." Jesus stretched out his hand and touched him, saying, "I am willing, be cleansed." And immediately his leprosy was cleansed. And Jesus said to him, "See that you tell no one, but go, show yourself to the priest, and present the offering that Moses commanded as a testimony to them." So the first one is the healing of the leper. Now, in that first century, Judaism had developed a list of major signs that the Messiah could be expected to give proof of identity, of his identity. Healing a leper was one of them. And his first miracle in the book of Matthew is healing the leper. Another was casting out a deaf, dumb, and blind demon. So let's look at what happened here. I think one important thing is when the leper came to Jesus, he said, "If you're willing, you can make me clean." Now, what did he mean when he said, "make me clean"? Of course, we know that leprosy makes a person unclean. And so the first thing you think of is he was saying, Lord, if you're willing, you can heal my leprosy. But there's more to it than that. Remember when you were a leper, if you were a leper, you were considered unclean. You had to live outside the camp. You couldn't go to temple services. You were considered unclean, ritually unclean. So it means, if you make me clean, it means I won't have to be separated from the community. Can you imagine what it would be like to just be totally outcast from the community? In the book of Leviticus, there are 2 whole chapters devoted to how to treat the lepers. Now, in Luke's account of this miracle, he says that the leper was covered with leprosy. In other words, he was probably the worst kind of leper. So when he said, make me clean, he was saying he wanted to be rid of the disease, of course, but he wanted to be part of the community. He wanted to be back in with the clean, with the holy. And so he said, if you're willing. Notice he said, if you're willing. He didn't say, if you're able, you can make me clean. He believed that Jesus was able. If you're willing, you can make me clean. Think about that for a minute. If you're willing, you can make me clean. Everything has to be according to the will of God. Now, think about it. Today, when we pray for healing, we don't pray if you're willing. We just beg him to do it because it's our will. But the leper said, if it's your will, you can make me clean. If it's not, you won't. I think there's a lesson for us in praying for healing there. Father, if it be your will, you can heal me. Have your way. There's a beautiful lesson even in this lesson, or even in this miracle that we read about. Lord, you can heal me because I want you to. No, that's not the prayer. If you're willing, you can make me clean. I like that. Note that Jesus reached out and touched him. Now, in the rules, but in reading that 2 chapters in Leviticus, you don't touch a leper. You don't touch anything unclean. But Jesus reached out and touched him. And by touching him, he became clean. Sound familiar? He became sin that we might be cleansed from sin. There's a picture of redemption there. He reached out and touched him. By touching him, he made him clean. The leprosy was gone. And then Jesus said to him, go and show yourself to the priest. Now this was according to the law of Moses. But think about it for a second. Could this be a calling card to the priest? Go and show yourself to the priest. Show him that I cleansed you. Jesus showing his messiahship. So, cleansing a leopard. Remember that this was one of the signs that would be a sign of the Messiah. Cleansing a leopard. Now the next miracle is a little longer, and we're going to read it. It's verses 5 through 13. It's the healing of the centurion's servant. And when Jesus entered Capernaum, a centurion came to him, imploring him and saying, Lord, my servant is laying paralyzed at home, fearfully tormented. And Jesus said to him, I'll come and heal him. But the centurion said, Lord, I'm not worthy for you to come under my roof, but just say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I also am a man under authority with soldiers under me. And I say to this one, go, and he goes, and to another, come, and he comes, and to my slave, do this, and he does it. Now when Jesus heard this, he marveled and said to those who were following, truly I say to you, I have not found such faith with anyone in Israel. I say to you that many will come from the east and west and recline at the table with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. But the sons of the kingdom will be cast into the outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. And Jesus said to the centurion, go, it shall be done to you as you have believed. And the servant was healed at that very moment. We've got a miracle here that has a lot of lessons for us. Now, remember that this was a Roman centurion. This meant that he was over 100 men. Now, Capernaum was apparently a military town. They were stationed there, apparently. Interestingly enough, in the New Testament, every centurion that's mentioned is a positive mention. It's kind of interesting because the Romans were the oppressors. They were the government that was over Israel, which were resented. But every time a centurion is mentioned in the New Testament, it's a favorable mention. That's kind of interesting to me. These centurions, according to what's recorded in the Bible, are fair-minded men that the Jews respected. And so it also says that Capernaum was a garrison, a military garrison town. We were able to visit Capernaum when we were in Israel several years ago, and of course today you don't get that image, but it's hard to imagine it being a military garrison town. The thing I remember most was its synagogue. But here was this military centurion. Several things we should notice about this miracle. First of all, I've already mentioned he was a Gentile. He was a Roman. Now, Jesus' ministry was to the Jews. This was a Gentile came to him. Another thing I think is kind of interesting is he didn't come for something for himself. He came to Jesus on behalf of a servant, not a family member, not a daughter or wife, but of a servant. And then Jesus said, I'll come and heal him. And he said, no, I'm not worthy for you to come to my house. Now, remember there was a law that Jews didn't go to Gentiles' homes. So he might have been reflecting some of that. But I think he was just seeing himself for what he was. I think it speaks something of his faith in who Jesus was. Remember, he started out by saying, Lord. He had absolute faith in Jesus simply to say the word. Say the word. There had to be some sense of who Jesus really was in that Gentile centurion. You notice what Jesus said? He marveled at the faith of this man. And then something really kind of strange at the end of this miracle. Jesus said, I say to you that many will come and recline at the table with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Many will come from the east and the west. Now, the east and the west were the Gentile nations. So here Jesus was dealing with a Gentile centurion, and his comments after he had said he would heal his servant was that many will come to the table, to the celebration, to the wedding feast, from the east and the west. So he was kind of opening the door to the Gentiles even at that point. But then he said the sons of the kingdom will be cast into outer darkness. Now, he wasn't talking about all the sons of the kingdom, of course. This is not, as David Stern, one of our Jewish authors, says, this was not replacement theology. He wasn't saying that they'll come from the east and the west, from the Gentile, and replace the Jews. But remember, Jesus was fighting opposition. So Jesus shocked his hearers by saying three things, announcing three facts about the kingdom. First, you didn't get into the kingdom just because you're a Jew. Not every Jew would participate in it. Second, he said that many Gentiles would participate in it. Third, the entrance to the kingdom of God depended on faith in Jesus, not on ancestry. So right here in the beginning years of Jesus' ministry, right after the Sermon on the Mount, he was speaking and healed the Gentiles' servant. So there's lessons there that we can learn. The third miracle we want to look at this evening is found in verses 14 and 15. When Jesus came into Peter's house, Peter's home, now right in the middle of Capernaum, even today, there is a place where Peter lived, not far from the synagogue. In fact, Capernaum is a fairly small town, or the ruins of a fairly small town. But when he came to Capernaum, he came into Peter's house. He saw his mother-in-law lying sick in bed with a fever. And he touched her hand, and the fever left her, and she got up and waited on him. He healed Peter's mother-in-law in Peter's house. Now, it's kind of interesting. We've looked at these three miracles. The Pharisees considered lepers, the first miracle, Gentiles, and women as nothing, outcasts. But in these three miracles, Jesus healed all three classes. He healed a leper who was a social outcast, a Gentile, and finally a woman. Jesus was extending his grace to all people. The Jews excluded these people, but he extended his grace. Aren't you glad that he reaches to all people? There are no outcasts to Jesus. Jewish narrowness did not bind Jesus any more than that disease from that leper contaminated him when he touched him. Now, another thing we notice about healing Jesus' mother, or Peter's mother-in-law, is that immediately she got up and served her family. Now, most of the time, when you get over a fever, you're really weak. You're not really able to bounce right back and do those things you're expected to do. But in this case, when Jesus touched her, she was whole immediately, and she got up and started serving him. She went about her business. We can scarcely suppose this miracle was done for the sake of showing his divinity. It was pure goodness and sympathy which moved him. This is one of the very few miracles that Jesus did to someone close to his disciples. Well, we have later on in the gospel the resurrection of Lazarus, which was part of his very close friends. But it's about the only one. Now, in verses 16 and 17 here, it talks about that he healed many other Galileans. Let's read those two verses. When evening came, this was still at Peter's house now, they brought to him many who were demon-possessed. He cast out the spirits with a word, and he healed all those who were ill. This was to fulfill what was spoken through Isaiah the prophet. He took our infirmities and carried our diseases. That comes from Isaiah 53, by the way. Now, this is not one of the 10 miracles I'm talking about, but this was part of it. It doesn't describe the individual miracles, but in that evening, he continued to heal. Then we come in verses 18 through 22, we come to his discussion. I said earlier that these miracles were broken up by discussions. This is one of them, 18 through 22. Let's take a look at what he says there. Now Jesus saw a crowd around him. He gave orders to depart to the other side of the sea. Then a scribe came to him and said, "Teacher, I'll follow you wherever you go." And Jesus said to him, "The foxes have holes and the birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head." Another of his disciples said to him, "Lord, permit me first to go and bury my father." But Jesus said to him, "Follow me and let the dead bury their own dead." Kind of a answer that takes you back at first. When Jesus said, "Let the dead bury their own dead." Following God or becoming his disciple, even becoming his believer, means embarking on a mission in life, doing what he directs, going where he tells us to go. In other words, his will must take precedence over everything else in our life. Remember that in this culture, they didn't have a Social Security. It was the responsibility of the children to take care of their parents. And so when this second individual said, "Let me first bury my father," it didn't mean that his father had died. It didn't mean that the father was even sick. But because of this responsibility he had, he was saying to Jesus, "I'll follow you, but I first have to take care of my responsibility to my father. Let me first bury my father," mean take care of him until he's gone and he's buried. So he was putting family first. At first, the response might seem uncharacteristic of a loving Christ. But what he was really saying, I must always come first. Everything else is second. He wasn't saying, don't take care of your father, ignore him. But he was saying, I have to be first. If you're going to follow me, I've got to be number one. And so that's what we're talking about here. First, your duty is to me. First in order of time, order of importance. Remember he said at another place, "He that loveth his father and mother more than me is not worthy of me." Now think about that for a minute. Whenever, this could get scary. Whenever something other than Jesus Christ takes priority, we're in danger. job. And of course, we have to do those things. That's part of our existence on earth. But we're talking about, first, the priority. Where does God fit in our lives? Do I go to church on Sunday and then Monday go back into the other part of my life and forget? No, God, Jesus has to be number one. Here's an interesting thought that one commentator brings up about this disciple that said, first let me bury my dead. One version of the Bible makes him out to be one of the disciples that already was following Christ. So he wasn't just a common person that made that, but one of the disciples. So we don't know that. The Bible doesn't tell us. But it could be. But it applies to every one of us. And so, a lot we can learn from these first three. Remember, these are miracles of healing. They have to do with those miracles that the prophets had said he would do, healing a leper. And those are the first three. We'll be looking at the other 7 in different lessons. But they all fit into the category of healing, and they were healing of those people that were not important in Jewish culture. The leper, the Gentile, the woman. He loves us. He cares about us. He came to save us. He came to heal. But we must believe. We must put him first. We must do it according to his will. That's what these teach us. Thank you for joining us for this lesson. I hope you've gained some insights into these miracles, and we'll be talking more about others later. Again, thank you.